Young and the Restless Spoilers. Victor Newman had always believed that power, once earned, was something no one could take from him, not rivals, not family, not even time itself. Yet as the events of the week converged like a storm front over Genoa City, there was a moment when even he felt the ground shift beneath his feet, a moment when the empire he had built on discipline, fear, and foresight seemed suddenly flimsy under the weight of one woman's relentless hunger for retribution. The revelations surrounding Phyllis Summers did not merely frustrate him. They ignited a visceral rage that spread through him like a cold fire. For decades he had watched the people around him betray, reform, relapse, and claw their way back into redemption. But what Phyllis had done, what she had dared to pull in the shadows, hit him in a place he rarely allowed anyone to see. It wasn't just about the corporate gamesmanship or the strategic blow she delivered. It was that she had waited, she had watched. She had calculated her moment with a patience that rivaled his own, and when she finally struck, she made sure Victor and Adam felt the sting simultaneously. As if her vengeance demanded not just victory, but spectacle. Adam, for his part, was unraveling beneath the weight of his father's fury. For all the friction between them, he wanted Victor's respect more than he would ever admit out loud. Yet now, standing on the edge of another crisis, he found himself being pulled back into the old cycle of blame and resentment, the one place he had sworn never to return. Every attempt to prove himself always seemed to snap under the pressure of someone else's scheme, and this time it was Phyllis who had cut the final wire. The idea that they had both walked into a trap she said one orchestrated with the kind of elegance she had honed from a lifetime of surviving men like them left Adam feeling not only angry, but exposed. He hated that. He hated how predictable she made them all look. But nothing prepared either man for the scene they discovered when they stepped into that dimly lit room and found Kane Ashby unconscious, his breathing shallow, his pulse unsteady. The scent of chloroform lingered in the air, clinging to the walls like an accusation. Victor crouched beside Kane, assessing the situation with the cold efficiency of a man who had seen far darker things in his lifetime, but even he felt a flash of disbelief. That Phyllis had gone this far, had physically incapacitated someone, had maneuvered a human being like a chess piece, opened a new dimension to her ruthlessness. Victor's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. If this was her doing, it meant she had crossed a line even he rarely crossed without understanding the consequences. And yet, she had done it effortlessly, almost theatrically, as if she wanted them to find Kane this way, as if the discovery itself was part of the message. Adam's thoughts spun faster than his breathing. He kept replaying the past months, wondering where Phyllis might have planted the seeds for this moment. She had been underestimated again, and that alone bruised his ego. He prided himself on reading people, on sniffing out ulterior motives, but she had slipped right past him. Her unpredictability had always unnerved him, but this time it bordered on admiration. It took nerve to execute something like this. Nerve, intelligence, and a willingness to scorch the earth if it meant watching her enemies burn. Still, even as he grappled with the shock, a question gnawed at him. Was this truly her plan from the beginning, or had she simply seized an opportunity as it unfolded? Phyllis was many things: impulsive, volatile, emotionally driven, but she could also be extraordinarily patient when revenge was involved. The uncertainty unsettled him more than the crime itself. Victor, however, saw no ambiguity. His instincts, sharpened over decades of war, corporate and personal, pointed directly at Phyllis. He could feel her fingerprints in the air, as metaphorical as they were literal. And when he pieced together the distraction Billy Abbott had orchestrated, the final clarity struck him like a blow. Billy had not outsmarted them because he was brilliant. He had outsmarted them because they had been focused on the wrong enemy. They had been looking outward when they should have been looking sideways. Billy's role was not the culmination of his own plan, but an accessory to a far more calculated move by Phyllis. A move that slid beneath their defenses because it appealed to their own expectations of chaos. Billy had distracted them with noise, and they had followed it like amateurs. The realization infuriated Victor on a level he did not often allow himself to feel. He was a man who built his empire on the premise that he was always 2 steps ahead, always anticipating the shift before it happened. Yet here he was, forced to admit that someone had maneuvered 2 steps ahead of him instead. He could not tolerate that, not from Jack, not from Billy, and certainly not from Phyllis. His rage was not merely about the attack on Kane or the corporate sabotage that threaded through the situation. It was about the insult, the audacity, the certainty with which she believed she could humiliate him and his son in one clean strike. But perhaps what disturbed him most was how justified her anger truly was. He remembered Marco. Everyone did. The memory of that deception, that violent distortion of identity, still echoed through the corridors of Genoa City's collective conscience. Phyllis had been violated emotionally, psychologically, existentially. She had been robbed of agency, stripped of autonomy, forced into an intimacy that did not belong to the man she believed she loved. Victor had always known that her pain from that ordeal had not disappeared. Pain like that never disappeared. It calcified, hardened, waited. And now, it appeared that she had chosen her moment to make the world remember what had been done to her. Victor saw the pattern instantly. She wasn't just striking back. She was reclaiming a piece of herself, rewriting a narrative she felt had been imposed on her unfairly. As he stood in that room, with Adam beside him and Kane unconscious beneath them, Victor felt the weight of that truth settle into his bones. Phyllis was not merely acting out of greed or corporate ambition. She was rewriting history in her own image. She was choosing to become the force of chaos rather than its victim. In another life, Victor might have respected that. But in this life, in this battle, it made her a threat, one he would not allow to grow unchecked. Yet even as Victor plotted his next move, Adam found himself wrestling with something far more complex than anger. Beneath the frustration and humiliation, there was a quiet, unwelcome recognition. Phyllis was doing what he often wished he could do: unleash everything, scorch every bridge, liberate herself from the constraints of morality and loyalty. Adam understood her in a way Victor never could. Her rebellion was a mirror of his own darkest impulses. Her need to rewrite her story, to wrest control from a world that had stolen it from her, echoed the same desire that had driven him his entire life. In some twisted way, he admired her. But admiration did not negate danger, and he knew better than anyone that when a person reached the point Phyllis had reached, they were capable of anything. The more Victor and Adam pieced together the timeline, the clearer the architecture of Phyllis's scheme became. Billy had been the diversion, Kane had been the target, and Victor and Adam had been the fools who walked right into the deception. The thought that she had outmaneuvered them almost effortlessly aggravated Victor to the point of obsession. He replayed every recent interaction with Phyllis, every moment when her eyes revealed just a little too much intensity. Every time she smiled with that sharp twist that hinted at knowledge she shouldn't have had. It all made sense now. She had been preparing for this. Whether she had planned every detail from the beginning, or whether she had adapted in the moment, no longer mattered. What mattered was that she had drawn blood. And she wasn't finished. Victor could feel it like a pressure in the air, an approaching storm, silent but deadly, swelling at the edge of the horizon. Phyllis had waited years for the right moment to make her move. She had suffered, rebuilt herself, hardened her resolve, and now she was moving through the world with the determination of someone who had already survived the worst thing imaginable. That kind of woman was unpredictable. That kind of woman was dangerous. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted restoration. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted the world to remember that she was not someone to underestimate. In the end, as Victor stood over Kane's unconscious body, he realized something he would never dare speak aloud. Phyllis Summers had become the kind of opponent he once would have recruited rather than fought. A strategist, a survivor, a storm given human shape. And though he would never allow her to win, not over him, not over Adam, he could not deny a grudging, infuriating sense of respect for the precision of her strike, but respect would not stop him. If anything, it made his determination sharper. Phyllis had declared war, and Victor Newman never stepped away from war. For Adam, the moment lingered not as a challenge, but as a reckoning. He saw in Phyllis a reflection of what might become of him if he ever allowed his pain to swallow him whole. It frightened him more than he expected, yet it also compelled him. Because in this twisted, electrifying conflict between two forces of relentless ambition, he sensed that only one person truly understood the storm inside him, and she was the one who had just brought his world to its knees. And somewhere within that realization, as the tension in the room thickened and Kane remained motionless, Adam felt the faintest whisper of an emotion he rarely felt anymore: inevitability. Phyllis had made her move. Victor would respond. And Adam knew that before long, he would be forced to choose a side not between right and wrong, but between who he had been and who he was becoming. In that quiet, breathless moment, with a war brewing that none of them were prepared for, one truth settled into the air like dust illuminated by a slant of fading afternoon light. Phyllis Summers had changed the game. And whether they admitted it or not, both Victor and Adam knew they would never see her the same way again. If I'm honest, as an outside observer watching the emotional currents twist and collide beneath the surface, there is something almost tragic about the way these characters orbit one another, each driven by wounds the others cannot see, each trapped in the gravity of choices made long ago. Perhaps that is what makes this world so compelling. Every act of vengeance is rooted in old pain, every scheme is a cry to be remembered, every conflict is as much internal as it is external. And maybe that is why Phyllis's rise feels inevitable, even justified. She is not simply the villain of this moment, she is the product of a history no one ever fully acknowledged. And perhaps, in some strange, unsettling way, this is her truth finally breaking free. Victor could feel the sting of humiliation settle into his bones with a heaviness he had not felt in decades. A weight that made him confront the possibility that the empire he had built from nothing, an empire forged through ruthless ambition, unforgiving discipline, and an almost mythic sense of personal destiny, was now slipping through his fingers because of one woman who had finally found the perfect moment to strike. Adam stood beside him like a shadow shaped from equal parts rage and disbelief, unable to process how everything they had secured, protected, rebuilt, defended, and manipulated had collapsed in a chain reaction orchestrated by someone they had underestimated one time too many. Phyllis had not simply outmaneuvered them, she had gutted the Newman legacy with surgical precision, stripping away their power layer by layer until all that remained was the raw truth of vulnerability they never allowed themselves to acknowledge. The takeover of Newman Enterprises alone would have been catastrophic, but the brutality of her subsequent moves made the blow nearly existential. She had handed Newman Media to Sally, a decision that cut into Adam like a reopened scar because it forced him to confront the complicated, unresolved fragments of his own past with her. Fragments that made her victory feel personal in a way that went beyond corporate humiliation. And then, as if dismantling two pillars of the family legacy were not enough, Phyllis had gifted Chancellor to Billy, a man who had never hidden his contempt for the Newman dynasty and who had spent years vacillating between self-destruction and vindictive crusades. To see him now receive Chancellor as if he had earned it through merit rather than chaos felt like a direct insult. A deliberate provocation designed not just to destabilize the Newmans, but to degrade them in the eyes of Genoa City. The emotional fallout among the family spread like a crack through glass. Victoria's reaction had been as volatile as expected. Beneath her poised exterior, there was always a storm waiting to be unleashed whenever her children were used against her. The moment she discovered the truth, her fear had manifested as anger, and that anger was directed at Billy with a ferocity only a mother backed into a corner could produce. It was not strategic rage, it was instinctive, primal, protective, and it revealed just how deeply she still carried the wounds of her past with him. Yet even that momentary eruption paled beside the cold resolve that formed once Victor assured her they would reclaim everything. For Victoria, that assurance was a lifeline, a reminder that in the darkest moments of corporate warfare, there was still one person whose belief in power, absolute, unshakable power, she could rely on. But belief alone could not mask reality. The Newman Empire, built from the bones of Victor's orphan childhood, stood now in ruins. He had risen from nothing, fought his way into the upper echelons of the business world through brutality and brilliance, and crafted an identity synonymous with dominance. Yet suddenly he found himself staring into a future in which the family name no longer commanded fear or respect. A future in which the company that had defined his life was now under the control of the very woman he had dismissed as a nuisance rather than a threat. There was something almost cruel in the poetic symmetry of it. The orphan who had built an empire now faced the possibility of being stripped of everything he had amassed, not by a corporation, not by a hostile takeover from a rival titan, but by Phyllis, someone whose hunger for justice, revenge, or reinvention had surged far beyond anything he anticipated. Adam, meanwhile, was sinking into a familiar pattern of internal collapse. Betrayal, loss, and displacement had shaped him for years, and now, as he stood in the wreckage of what had once felt like his rightful inheritance, he could not escape the crushing sense that fate was repeating itself. Each time he clawed his way into a position of influence, someone took it from him. Each time he believed he had carved out a future, separate from the mistakes of his past, someone reminded him that freedom was an illusion. Phyllis's move struck him not just professionally, but emotionally. It forced him to confront the echoes of his own failures, the legacy of his own miscalculations, and the shameful awareness that he had once again been outplayed by someone he should have predicted. Rage came easily to him, but beneath that rage was a deeper wound, a wound cut by the knowledge that he had not learned as much as he believed, had not grown as far as he hoped, had not escaped the shadow he thought he finally outran. The question of whether the Newman family would require financial assistance, whether they, of all people, might find themselves temporarily without resources, became a darkly comedic rumor whispered through the corners of Genoa City's social circles. The Newmans, once the most untouchable family in town, now hovered on the edge of embarrassment, with their fortune in pieces and their corporate assets stripped away. Some even speculated that Sally, now in control of Newman Media, would refuse any notion of financial reliance on the Newman legacy out of sheer principle. She had built her identity on reinvention and survival without dependency, and accepting assistance from the family, whose trust she had once struggled to earn, would undermine everything she now represented. It was a small detail in the broader chaos, but it underscored an uncomfortable truth. Those who once revolved around the Newman orbit no longer needed their gravitational pull.